I was fascinated particularly by consumer product because I thought, wow, bottled water, we spent $50 billion in 2008. Today it's $350 billion. And what a crazy idea. Bottled water, world water crisis, people living, people dying. And how does one not serve the other? And that was the first link. The bigger idea, which we would now frame Thankyou as, we see one world with two extremes. Extreme poverty, there's 736 million people living in it, and extreme consumerism. We do spend $63 trillion a year on stuff. And so Thankyou is a bridge between our world's two extremes. And at 19, I saw it.
Hello, everyone. This is a bit of a different format to our usual episodes. I'm quite excited to present this one to you. It's short and punchy, but it's packed full of amazing information. And the individual that I'm interviewing is Daniel Flynn from Thankyou Water, and he's an amazing communicator. We were able to pack in quite a lot of information to a short period of time, and I think for me, the main themes of this episode are really about how we can use and harness our workplaces, our businesses, to be able to address some of the issues that we see around us. And so Daniel has really been able to, and he describes that at an early age, he was very much a money-focused person, where he would be thinking about, property development, how he could potentially make the most money possible. He was very, very centered around that. And it was interesting that he had a conversation with me around, there was a point in time where he discovered that there were some issues globally with people accessing clean water, and that would lead to potentially children dying. And so one of the themes that I really see here is where finance and compassion really collide, because he said, once I actually started to think about what that would be like for my sister, as an example, to drink bad water and then to perish, that really created the motivation in me to make a change. And he said, often the change makers of the world often sort of delve into this sort of compassion and empathy, and address it through, and the way he has addressed it is through creating a social enterprise, which is interesting because there's a cost of having a social enterprise. And for him, written in and baked into the constitution of Thankyou is that he doesn't have skin in the game in the sense of having an equity position in Thankyou. And so when, Thankyou gets sold or whatever happens in terms of its exit in the future, he's not really building a financial asset for himself in that sense. And so that's the cost. But we talked about the fact that whilst that is the case, he is building an equity, but an equity of the soul is how I described it in the episode. And I really believe that's the case. I think Daniel is an example of someone that is addressing a very significant issue, using business as an ally, and he's bridging two worlds as he actually describes it. So it is very, very, very much also helpful in the sense of that he has a real sense of meaning in his career. He has a real sustainability with Thankyou in the sense that he's able to understand how he is tangibly helping the world in very, very specifically. And I think that's an amazing thing for us to learn about. And I think when we reflect on our own businesses, there's always different variations to this and permutations of this, or even within our own careers. Do we wait until we make enough money to assist and help others? Or can we, in some way, shape or form, using our business, using our careers, using our after hours to somehow assist, to help, bring about a greater meaning for ourselves, but a greater contribution for others? And so I think this episode really highlights that for me, and I think it's a great one. So I'd love your feedback and thoughts, but please enjoy Daniel Flynn. There's a lot more to it as well, and it's packed into, as I said, a very bite-sized, punchy episode. So enjoy. So yeah, tell me a little bit about Thankyou and the impact and that you do have, and also why you started it to begin with. Like, what was the idea behind it?
Yeah. Well, we are a social enterprise. So that's a business that uses business for social good. In that there's a spectrum. We are a pretty hardcore one. We're all for our mission. So our business is owned 100% by our charitable trust. So founders don't get equity. There are no shareholders or investors. And we commit 100% of our dividends out to our partners around the world. And to date, the impact, your question, we've raised $17 million for our impact partners around the world, which is currently working with 18 charities who specialize in many different fields, but all focused on the end of extreme poverty.
Wow.
And we back them. So, that's what we do. Why we started and why I kind of got into this, 19 years old, very focused on money, very focused on business, in particular property development. So I had a real fascination. Yeah. Fascination with property development. Once again, the big commercial building, like, skyscrapers and luxury homes, and was interested in a lot of things about money, currency trading through high school a bit, always fascinated by business. So I'm heading in that direction. But I could sum up by like, if I by 21 wasn't a millionaire, I was a failure. That's sort of the lane I'm in. I'm reading the books, I'm going for it. And this interesting moment at 19 where I was watching some stories of kids who didn't have access to clean water. And they're in sub-Saharan Africa, and many of them talk about losing brothers and sisters to waterborne disease. And I'm sitting there watching statistics like 4,500 children die every day from waterborne disease. I'm thinking, that is bad. But like, I knew poverty was a thing. And my worldview at that time was, you got to make a difference, but you can make a bigger difference later once you've made more money. So I think I'd sponsored a child through World Vision, and I thought, great, one day, give back in a really big way. But it was really interesting at this moment, wondering, what if that story was me? What if I just lived through what I just watched and it's incomprehensible to me? My sisters Jess and Mel dying, me finding out the water I got them killed them, then me growing up living with that.
You know what? It feels like a lot of people don't do that take that extra step. They identify the fact that there's a problem, but they don't take the step of actually thinking about themselves in that problem. And that might be the single reason that you actually cared enough to go that next step. Is that right?
Yeah, I think empathy is an interesting thing that we probably are all lacking a bit, maybe globally, collective.
Yeah.
But that idea of like, what does it look like to put myself literally in someone else's shoes? And I think that is the great difference between there's a problem out there or, it's not me, but what if it was me? And the fact that it's not me, well, that's amazing, but can I change that? And that was the transformation I went on. And I think you're right. Many people who change things truly wonder what would life have been like if it was them. And it's out of that gratitude and that gap that sort of drives them. So there's two things that really drove me, maybe three, but one was the mission. One was like, this is so wrong. And also just because I'd spent so much time thinking about money and researching money, having mentors who had lots of money. I didn't know everything about money, but I knew there's a lot of it. And so when you put the context of that issue, which feels like it doesn't belong in our world now, you overlay with just how much money there is floating around, going around, the deals that are done. That's hard to unsee. I was fascinated particularly by consumer product because I thought, wow, bottled water, we spend $50 billion in 2008. Today it's $350 billion. And what a crazy idea. Bottled water, world water crisis, people living, people dying. And how does one not serve the other? And that was the first link. The bigger idea, which we would now frame Thankyou as, we see one world with two extremes. extreme poverty. There's 736 million people living in it, and extreme consumerism. We do spend $63 trillion a year on stuff. And so Thankyou is a bridge between our world's two extremes. And at 19, I saw it. Like, I didn't see all of it, but I saw, oh, imagine that. Imagine that serving that. And the stuff we buy, righting a wrong, this sort of inequality gap that really shouldn't exist. And so Thankyou's born. And I think it was mission for me. And that injustice, I think it was vision, like imagine a world that looked how it could. And for me, that's hard to walk away from. Once I see something, I find it hard to unsee it, basically.
Yeah.
And so, you know, especially when you look around and it doesn't exist. When you go to the fridge at 7-Eleven, when you walk through the supermarket and you're like, this vision, it doesn't exist. And it should. And it could. And that was the adventure that became Thankyou. And then I think over time, maybe we unpack it on the podcast, but I definitely went deep in my own history and future and personal makeup. And really, the Thankyou journey got really hard, like really, really hard. If we unpack it.
Did it ever feel like you were going back into the money? Did it ever feel like there were times where you kind of lost your path a little bit? Or did you ever feel like, am I doing myself a disservice here because I'm doing something so grand and so great, but I'm actually not, maybe reaping the benefits that, maybe I should take a greater share, that sort of thing.
Totally. Yeah. There are many moments like that, particularly when they go and get stuff, particularly when you meet other founders, and a kind of natural conversation in some of this ecosystem is found in terms like net worth or what's your exit plan or I just exited for X and and it's like, well, one day I'll finish up in my job. That's the exit. You don't get paid $1. There's no dollar like that. That's it. You stop getting paid. That's your exit. You stop getting your salary and that's beautiful. But is it a wrestle? Of absolutely, particularly given where I was heading. I mean, I literally was all about the money.
Yeah.
And Thankyou is 180 degrees the other way.
Yeah.
Except weirdly, it's the same idea. It's still chasing the money.
Yeah.
It's just for a fundamentally different reason. And
so for all intents and purposes, you are a business owner in the biggest way possible. But in some ways, you're not. From an equity and ownership point of view, you've deliberately gone away from that model. So I'm assuming you're remunerated through a wage of some description based upon the role that you do. And I'm sure you're remunerated well, which you should be, but there's skin in the game for other reasons, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if we're really brutally looking at this, it's like we get all the risk of a business owner and all the pressure and all the stress, but none of the equity and sort of that ultimate gain, which is really interesting. And when you start out, that's easy because you're like, it's just an idea. But the more documents you sign and the more risk registers you build, right, as organizations scale, and you're like, oh, wow, this is big. And it gets bigger. And then also that effort. I 100% see why, founders of companies get looked after very well, because to get from 0 to 1, it's almost an impossible leap from nothing to something. Then 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 is a whole bunch of pain as well. So I get it. Interestingly though, yes, from time to time, I have a thought. And my wife, who's a co-founder, we wrestle with the imagine. But at the same time, it's not an annual decision we make. It's a decision we made in 2008. It's written into the Constitution. Someone was like, do you ever get tempted just to sort of, I'm like, nah, you go to prison, like you go to jail. It's baked into the thing. And not only
the grass is always greener, right? We're forgetting about the equity of the soul. There's something there to be said for why you're so passionate, and you clearly are still passionate and enjoying what you do. There's something to be said for the success that is coming off the back of it. as a result of your passion towards it. If you're not passionate and it's just chasing the money, the question is, do you feel that you would have been as successful in something else?
Wow, it's a good question. We will not know. Although at 18, when I was 18, I was working my first property development in Adelaide, which was fun. There was another couple and I, and we were building 3 properties, and then it became 6. And with no money, so I was 18, had no dollars to the name, and that was fun. And I was very much like property development. At 19, this happens, and this idea of Thankyou starts to grow. And I end up making this really interesting decision, quite a life-defining one for me. I walked away from this deal that I thought was my future, but also was a lot of work and focus to chase this thing. And that for me was an interesting fork in the road, because at one sense I was, most 18-year-olds would it's such an incredible opportunity. But actually in my heart, I was like, this feels wrong and this feels right. And I followed this right path, and it's deeply rewarding, incredibly rewarding and fulfilling. And there's not one part of me that's like, if only. It's actually, there's a part of me going, we're not even scratching the surface of the potential of Thankyou. And we're going to keep going and keep building.
There's something to be said, and I know some people don't feel comfortable in speaking about this, but I seem to recollect, I don't know why, I may have seen some promotion of what you guys do on TV, but it's something around faith and your background as well that is important in this particular conversation.
Yeah, look, I talk a lot about moments, and one particular moment. So here I'm at 19, I'm having a moment in front of my computer watching kids and have access to clean water. That's a moment. There's another moment I talk about in our book, chapter 1, and when I speak publicly, and it's when we're a few months into this idea. We need hundreds of thousands of dollars to launch. And everyone's saying, where are you going to get the money? And, I'm thinking, I'm not sure yet, but we were very convinced we didn't want investors. So that was a conundrum. And I talk about this moment where, for context to the moment, I grew up in church. So my parents took me to church every week. And in my teenage years, I wasn't pumped about it. But then I came back later in my teenage years and find my own kind of faith walk. And I have this moment where I'm sitting at the back of a room. It was a church service, and I wasn't listening to the guy up the front, in the back row. Man, if I'm meant to do this water thing, I need a sign. This is what in my head, I'm like, we need all this money. I don't even know if it's my path. How do you know your path? And I'm like, God, if I'm meant to do this, just give me a sign, like right on the wall, Daniel, do the water thing. And I joke, but I kind of wanted that sort of, make it clear, and that didn't happen, which I sometimes joke that maybe it was too distracting for the room. But there's an old Bible sitting down on the floor, and I reach down and pick it up and I flip it open. And without flipping the page either way, I look down and read this little verse. It was in a book called Isaiah. It said, the poor and needy search for water, yet find none.
Say that again.
The poor and needy search for water, yet find none. Their tongues are parched with thirst, and I, the Lord God, have heard their cry, and I'll turn the deserts into springs and the valleys into pools. And I'm in the back of this little service, and I'm like in awe. I'm like who saw that? What? And so people are like, that's a coincidence. I'm like, wow, it's a pretty good one, because I literally was thinking about this water thing and then the needy search for water. And so for me, in my personal faith walk, that was actually a defining moment of like, I think this is what I'm meant to do. And I'm glad I had that moment and a few others, because as this journey goes on, this gets deeper and darker. And those that know our first 3 years, they're heavy. They're actually really, really tough. And so there were many almost like dark nights of the soul. And so I do think that faith, vision, mission, these are the things that for me, if we were to unpack why do you do what you do, it's found in that. And probably since having a growing family, that kind of has added in the vision and the mission of my life has broadened. But these are the things that, anchor me, drive me. And I find fulfillment in. So when someone's like, oh, but you didn't make the money, it's like, yeah, it's complicated to try and explain it, but in simple terms, I've got peace, fulfillment, stuff that, I you just can't put a dollar on.
And I think in some ways, the skills that you pick up in what you're doing, they're transferable intergenerationally. They're not something, I don't know if you have kids or not, but, I've talked to, I don't know if you know Net Wealth Investments, but Matt Heiner from Net Wealth Investments, and he talks about transferring this, not transferring wealth into but transferring information and education to the next generation. So it's kind of a very narrow view to say that there's not an accumulation here. There's an accumulation in a big way. So would you agree on that?
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I've said that to my mum and dad before, because I think, private conversation, but I think my parents, and I probably heard this more from my mum, like this feeling of like, oh, I'm not sure in our will what we leave to you is going to be very significant, and I'm like, Mum, no, you don't get it. You gave us everything. We're good. We don't need a dollar. Like, you built in us these values and these ideals and these fundamentals, and often we haven't lived up to them all, but still you've embedded this, and that's the gift, right? And so yes, I agree with that. And I love the thought that then from what's come from my parents and then from Justine's parents into our children, Jed, our son Jed and our daughter Jordan, wow, what's the sort of that family net worth that's building in terms of handed down? I think that's a beautiful idea.
Oh, that's great.
So I hope you enjoyed the episode with Daniel Flynn. Obviously, there was so many takeouts, but interestingly as well, the idea that Daniel's background, both from a faith-based point of view, but also from his family and his parents and his upbringing, was something that was really relevant to him in being able to start Thankyou and to continue with it. And, conversations with family around inheritance and so forth, really the monetary side of an inheritance is in Daniel's world is not as important, as he described to his mum, as what his parents have actually given him in terms of skills, capability. And, another episode that was relevant to this was, the Matt Heiner Net Wealth episode as well, where Matt talks of, providing the financial legacy is one thing, but being able to provide your children with the capability of being able to build and innovate and make change and be confident enough to step out in the world and contribute is ultimately the most important thing that you can provide as a legacy intergenerationally. And that makes a lot of sense to me as well. We also had Brooke McCarthy on in previous episodes that talked about social enterprise and how you might be able to start moving in that direction. And clearly as well, we've had Simon Griffiths from Who Gives a Crap as well, who runs a very successful social enterprise as well. So there are examples of these individuals doing this on the ground. And as I said in the intro, really, it's not about necessarily saying that everyone has to go away and start a social enterprise, but there is a way of thinking about contribution that can be in the present moment. Doesn't have to be delayed for a time that we feel that we are now financially successful and able to do so. And so I think that's the message with this particular episode. Hope you've enjoyed it. Please love your feedback on the socials. Please send me any comments around this episode or any other episode. I'm always open to the conversation. Thanks.